Welcome you all to the December 19th, Saturday, and we are doing our 6th session of Language Research Seminar of 2020. I thought I'll give you a little overview about what this Language Research Seminar is and how we are proceeding on it. This actually predates our efforts on India Discovery Center, because when we first thought about how India distinguishes herself or has distinguished herself in the world, the first thing came was language. Because no civilization, no culture, no country, no nation has spent as much time on understanding human articulation, speech, as India has. Now, whether it was through a whim, because why I call a whim, but why should sun have a voice? The sun is rising, sun is shining, sun is bright, sun moves around. And to discover that sun also gives us life, which means that something sun has that it gives us. So this discovery that celestial objects are not really nominal, they may have an animation in them. So that leads to think, can you talk to the sun? So how do you talk to the sun? Sun is so far away, sun is remote. So this process that whether the human being can talk to the sun, whether we have the faculty to deliver our message to the sun, became the inquiry. And it continues. But then we can say that sun doesn't listen, sun doesn't care, but the enigma remains that whether the sun listens or doesn't care, but gives us life. So we should talk to him. So now the question is, what is the mode of our talking? So that is the discovery of the human voice, that we have this instrument and we can't reach him, but we can probably raise our tone, voice, articulate, modulate, create value to it such that it may go to sun. So this kind of metamorphosis, that I can become a sun, my expression could be sun-like, that became the research of early Indian linguists. It is massive, dense, philosophical, difficult. But then we thought we can bring it to the world, saying that we still have the voice, we speak, we modulate, we have intonation, we can pretend each other, we can imitate, we can emulate. So the speech is your signature. Given that as a view, we try to examine what speech is. So that is the language research seminar, to understand what speech is. And through many debates, many sittings, we thought that we should explore that is speech language. Whether speech is an expression, where speech comes out of us as a transformation of our thought to a sound's acoustic signal, or it is pre-canned. So the thought, how does thought become speech? So what that means is that human beings all over the world have the same emotion of hunger, same emotion of laughter, same emotion of love, same emotion of fear, but then whether the same emotion would be expressed in the same acoustic signal. The answer is why not? Must be. So there comes Sanskrit. Sanskrit as a language that possibly we are endowed with certain amount of vocal apparatus, lungs, mouth, organs, tongue, teeth. So through that, we have the ability to express, create sound signal. So creation of sound signal is different than the origin of the sound signal, which is the thought. So this process, how does the thought transform and then become sound signal, became our search. Now, in process of this search, this transformation, somewhere the culture comes in, the nationality comes in. So before it is uttered, we try to taint it. I'm a Portuguese, I'm Indian, I'm Telugu, or I'm something else. So when the same love comes out, but then in the process, in the transmission process, we color it. So this is the model. Now, how this model come to me? I thought somehow in 1997, MIT did this artificial intelligence lab, and they did the Templeton lectures. So one of the lectures they asked me to give. So through there, this first inception of language, which basically meant was that you don't utter a word because word is a noun, word is an object. An object doesn't exist without its context. So when we have this meeting, I'm speaking, so this meeting is understood by the context. So hence a monkey is not a monkey as an isolated object. Monkey is in a tree, open air, jumps. So all that is frozen as the monkey word. So this context, how does the brain handle the context? The density of the brain that will handle the context. So that the thought or the idea of the word is built in to that large context. So I should introduce few people. We started with 5 people, myself and my friend Jaspal is here. Jaspal is a student of philosophy. So he has also studied the Vedas. And Jaspal, then we brought Prem joined. Prem is a biologist. And so this was like a 2013 or 2014. Then we have Bela, Dr. Bela Kusharas. He and I, we worked together in Harvard on the high resolution brain atlas 25 years ago. So that was the first time the brain was dissected. And so Bela joined. And then also we had Hardeep, who happens to be a designer and she's a monitor of our work. So she kept us in track so that we don't veer away too much into philosophy. So those 5 people, we produced 3 papers so far. We started with, we introduced the word. So those papers are available. People want to read, we can give them. And then since last year, we thought we will go into this computation modeling. That is to model speech, human speech. Can we really take a thought and then move it through the brain and then articulate it? What comes out? Does a syllable come out? Multiple syllables come out? Does a sound come out? A grunt come out? We shall see. So that's the project we are in now. So what you are seeing is the 5th lecture in this project. We started with neurocircuitry by Dr. Bella, and then Prem did the talk on, I think, anatomy, neuroanatomy, and then Jaspal gave a talk on cognition. Cognition. Cognition is a part of how does the anatomy and circuitry will react to the thought. So then Bella joined in September, where he went to the process of intentionality. It's a black box, which we call mana in Sanskrit. So that stays in there. And we don't know the full behavior of it. But for example, I'm speaking and how much you are handling it, how much your mind is there, the function of intentionality. So that's not quantified yet. So that we did. So today, Prem Nagar, who has been an intense researcher in this field now, and he knows more about this than anyone probably on the earth now, about this combination of how does the syllable becomes a speech, or how does the thought becomes. So he will kind of educate us today on the Western literature. Why? Because the speech making is not that what I'm thinking, but the mechanics of speech is human. It is clinical. We are doing it locally. So that part we have to learn. And then we have to go back the eternity of speech, the process of thought transformation. That has not happened. We will do gradually. We'll discuss further. So let us now have, I have requested Dr. Bella. Dr. Bella is a neuroanatomist, as I said before, and he's an Hungarian. By virtue of being from Hungary, he has more depth into language than most of us, because Hungary is a separate country, separate kind of operation. And so you will, so he presents it in his own talks, but now he will introduce our friend Prem. So the way it will go is we will go for maybe an hour, a little more than an hour with the Prem's talk. So then after that, we will have the Q&A. You can ask any question on the general topic, on language, on research, on how we move. India Discovery is a larger project. Speech is a project inside of it. So with that, let us go. We should not disturb in between, but we can have any number of questions at the end, and we will try to answer. And hopefully by about 11:30, it should be to end. So now I introduce you, Dr. Bella Kosharas, who will in turn introduce a friend, Prem Nagar. Please unmute yourself. Bella, I don't see Bella.
Hello. Yes.
Okay. All right. Where
yes.
are you?
How are you? Good.
I don't see you though. Where are you?
No, we are able to see. Yeah, Bella.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Okay.
So from
it is. Yep.
From the video point of view, can you make him the face larger, or you see larger?
Yeah, we see larger.
Okay. All right. Good.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's.
Okay. Carry on.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is a privilege to me to introduce you Prem Nagar, whom I met in Bijoy's language group. He is a fervent colleague to absorb a lot of information about the brain function, which is our central analyzing and creative machine, as the computer people would say, the CPU. enabling us acquire language that we use in communicating with each other, as we call it, the speech. His attraction probably originated from his strong computer background, and he's got amazed the capacity of the production of the human brain, and he is eager to gather and digest new knowledge of neuroscience. Now, he presents us a comprehensive picture of how the people's knowledge has been developed from the ancient Greek and Romans' time up to recent time. How the thinkers handle the relation of the language and speech, in the field of which Ferdinand de Saussure has made a fundamental progress, and he puts the brain into the central role of these complex processes. We'll see the several aspects of the versatile brain functions of how the speech eventually taking place. Now, let me tell some real things. Mr. Prem Nagar has an interdisciplinary training and work in the information industry. He is a computer wizard. He worked for Hewlett-Packard for about 10 years and led and developed a program called AppleSoft and distributed database architecture. The product was selected a case study in Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, India, and was featured by DataQuest. He came to the US in 1997 and worked for the big companies, Oracle Corporation, and retiring just this year now. So he is a young fellow. He has been associated with India Discovery Center Language Research Project since 2013 as a researcher in cognitive science and neuroscience. His lecture on neuroanatomy of cognition was highly appreciated. He acts as a content manager in India Discovery Center in the Virtual India project. He's a leader of the language and literature track. He comes from a family of musical talents and is a member of the Sioux Asian Choir of New England. So then I call and ask Prem to present his talk, of which the title is Linguistics, Neurology, and the Science of Speech, a review of the Western literature. Please, Prem.
Thank you, Dr. Bela Kosaras, for the nice introduction. I acknowledge and greatly appreciate the intellectual support of Dr. Vijay Mishra and Dr. Bela Kosaras and Jaspal Singh. They have been my guide and philosopher. And thank you all for joining this session. Now, in today's discussion, we'll be reviewing the Western philosophical literature and also the literature in the neurology and science of speech. So when we receive a sound stimulus, it is perceived and it gets meaning and stored in our brain. When thought comes and we decide to speak, a message is prepared mentally, and by use of our vocal apparatus, the message is uttered or spoken. This discussion I have segmented into three areas: linguistics, which is an analysis of the language form, meaning, and context. In the context of neurology, we'll be discussing the speech perception and semantics and the creating meaning, and science of speech in terms of production and transmission of speech. Now, this entails a high-level review of general theory of linguistics in the Western philosophy and certain classical speech models, and how sound waves, when we hear, gets transformed into electric waves and does the memory encoding and perception, and then creates semantic units, and the speech production process and the play of the human articulators. So now, before we get into the linguistics, let me give you a personal experience here. So one day I was just trying to make a dish from a raw butternut squash, which is hard to cut. So I took a big kitchen knife and I was cutting the squash into pieces, and suddenly the knife pierced one of my fingers, and my biology forced me to release an utterance, "Oh." The question is, what happens to the brain that produced this sound? The question is, what is sound and what is the meaning of such utterances? Now, this question and many such related questions we have been asking and seeking answer for millennia. Speech has been a mystery, as how we think, how we choose words, put them in some kind of a syntactic structure in a sentence, and then release it through our mouth. I'll discuss the Western philosophical ideas in this section. Now, our universe had many natural phenomena. They still have. Fish in the sea, birds in the sky, animals on the earth, much before humans arrived on Earth. They all release sounds that create acoustic space. Humans probably were mimicking natural sound that might have become a way to communicate with each other. Greek philosophy, in their intellectual traditions, accounted words and forms that exist by nature and that exist by conventions. Now, it's a social convention because everything is through the consensus of the society. So Plato, in his model of language, defines that on one hand, there is a speaker or a knower who signifies or knows, and on the other hand, there is an object that's signified or known, and alternatively, there exists a word which by itself signifies an object. Therefore, the naming or applying a word to pick out an object or a phenomena is only one part of the use of the language, but it's an essential part. Aristotle, who was a student of Plato, defined speech that speech is the representation of the experiences of the mind. Now, in the classical theory of language in the Roman time, Stoicism, who was emphasizing logic, why, what happens, that's the logic of the fundamental behavior. And he hypothesized that language did not exactly mirror nature. And he developed this distinction in terms of significant, what signifies, and signify, what is signified. In other words, what is an expression and what is the content of that expression. Now, this led to the groundwork of the modern theories of inflection, which is grammar. So the medieval grammarian envisaged 3 stages in speaking. According to them, things that exhibit properties. So any object, when we see the shape of the object, the color of the object, the ambience of the object, the order of the object, and the various aspects of the object which our mind perceives or understands. And that are communicated by the resources of the language in the mind. Now, the resources of the language we acquire through the social process, social interactions, our grooming, our education, that gives us the capacity of language to communicate. So the rationalist in 17th century, that speaking is expressing thoughts by signs that were invented for the purpose. Now, in our thinking process, we are trying to play with certain objects in our mind. That means we are trying to relate those objects, or we are trying to find the certain properties of the object. And that entire process, that how to communicate that play or interplay of those objects, we find words. And therefore, the words of different classes came into being to correspond to the different aspect of our thinking. Thus, a classical view of language developed, which is called language is simply a naming process. Words name things. Now, on this view, the world is made up of things and language is made up of words, and there is one-to-one relationship between words and things. Now, that was the thought process at the time. Now, from a theory of linguistics, they divided the philosophers of believing in or analyzing linguistics. They divided the entire approach to linguistics into 2: humanistic approach and sociobiological approach. Now, in the humanistic approach, language is a socio-cultural phenomena that emphasizes culture, nature, creativity, and diversity. Now, people created language as a step-by-step process to serve their psychological need to communicate with each other. Now, when we are thinking something, there is some level of pressure builds up, which forces us to share that information which we are thinking with others. So everything is mind related or brain related. It's a psychological process. From a sociobiological perspective, language is a biological phenomena and approach language as a part of the cultural evolution. Now, Francisco defined that the language is a rational human invention. Now, from a humanistic, further going into the humanistic aspect of it, so the language arises from a human psychology, and it's a collective unconscious mind of the community, and it is shaped by its history. Now, it's very interesting that a simple object like tomato, some community call that as a tomato, some other calls as a tomato, some other call as a tomato. So we've not been able to come to a consensus of what that particular object is in terms of how to call it. Now, similarly, water, without which we can't live. So in English, we call it water. In Hindi, we call it pani or jal or neer in Tamil. So there are various words associated with the same object. Now, this is a very interesting aspect of it. However, this is the naming an object and meaning of an object is a collective unconscious mind of the community, because it's the consensus of the community which decides what the name is and what the meaning of that particular name is. Ferdinand de Saussure in 19th, 20th century created a semiotic theory. Now, in this theory, he developed play of signs and symbols, and his theories were known as functionalism, formalism, structuralism. However, post-structuralism, Saussurian idea of language as an interaction of the conceptual and expressive system was subsequently elaborated. We'll discuss that subsequently. American linguists defined that language is a system of arbitrary vocal symbols by means of which a social group cooperates. From a sociobiological perspective, they say that the language stems from the human genome. So it's a part of the human genetic material. And certain decades ago, a FOXP2 gene has been implicated for the ability or human ability of speech and language. Social Darwinism says that the same principles and methods of evolutionary biology, which hinges primarily on the random genetic mutation, apply to the genetics as well. So the play of human development or the biological evolution and genetics has been going somewhat parallel. Noam Chomsky in 1955 at MIT, he says, the language is a genetically inherited phenomenon, that it's a genetic material and you are born with, or we are endowed with capability or the ability to speak and the language. Now, Lakoff says that the cognitive linguistics hypothesize that human inherited from animals the ability for deductive reasoning based on the visual thinking. Hawkins suggests that brain as a syntactic parser. So when any stimulus as a, let's say, frame of a sentence which comes in our mind, so we dissect that. There is some kind of a filtering or the deciphering of that sentence happens. We try to understand what's an object, what is the subject, what is the verb, what is the adjective, and various aspects of that sentence. We break it and then we try to make sense of that particular subject. So therefore, the brain is working as a syntactic parser. So he says that brain may find easier to process certain word order, and that certain word order which he meant was subject, verb, object, which is in English. And then he says that's explaining their prevalence. Now we have 7,000 languages in the world today, and some uses SVO as a structure, some has SOV, or and there are different combinations of the subject, verb, object, and that is the structure of the sentence people use in different languages. However, the Hawkins idea is not confirmed yet. Saussure, who was a Swiss linguistic, and he was a professor of general linguistics, when he died, from his students' notes, a book was published, and the name of the book was The Course of General Linguistics by, of course, Ferdinand de Saussure. Now, he defines speaking and language slightly differently, and he says, speaking is heterogeneous and composed of different elements. Now, when we speak, like I'm speaking, so my speech has certain intonations, certain frequencies, certain timbre, so speech is our signature. I mean, human signature. I mean, everybody has a unique speech, and there's a reason we call speech is our signature. Language is homogeneous as it is a system of signs. We use words and connect words, whether word is a subject, whether word is an object, whether word is a verb or adjective or preposition. So it is word all across. Now, the union of these words decides what the meaning is. And both word and the sign, I mean the meaning and the word, are psychological because they emanate in your brain, and the listener also makes sense of this sound string in his brain. So therefore, it is all psychological. Saucer distinguished Langenperol into two, and he says the language, which is a language, and this is a system underlying our speech activity. So as I'm speaking, you are hearing a sound. However, underneath that sound, what you are hearing is a language structure, which is the English language structure, and that is what he means here. Perol is an idealized abstraction of language that is a speech of an individual person. Now, each person has his own voice, own frequency, own timbre. That's the reason it is called a signature, and that is what he really means here. So language is composed of words as signs that gain meaning from the relationship and contrast with other signs. Now, that's the way he was trying to develop the concept of language and concept of meaning of the word, and that meaning changes because of the position of the word within a sentence frame. Now, let's take an example. There are two words, I and should. So if we connect and say I should, it completely means different than I reverse the position of these two words and say should I. So what he meant was the relationship word to another word and the contrast with other sign, that is what the meaning gets developed. So Lang and Perol make up 2/3 of Saussurian speech circuit, and he says that the third is our brain, where the knowledge of language is located, because this is where we acquire all the linguistic knowledge, and then we use that linguistic knowledge in conveying our thought process or thoughts. So signs are communicated through our senses by visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory, or gustatory. Now coming to Saucer's notion of sign one. Now let's look at this particular object. Now this is an object which we call as a sign, which we can call as a thing. Now this object has a signifier we call, as in terms of sound, an apple or a word, apple or an image. So to denote this particular object, the signifier is used is, let's say, apple. Now this particular signifier has a significance, and which is a mental concept. That means, this could be a fruit, it's a delicious fruit, or it could be a computer, or it could be an iPhone. So in other words, this sign or this object has a signifier, and this signifier has a signified, and this relationship between signifier and signified is not one-to-one, it is arbitrary, because it all depends on how that particular word is used, in what context that word is used. So that is the play of Saucer's notion one, and he says that the entire signifier and signified is in the mind, and particularly in the perceiver's mind, because he's the other person who's making sense of that particular sound. So language has a dual essence that unites concepts and sound image. So Saucer's notion two. Now Saucer has been evaluating, and for a millennium, a concept or a classical view of the language he inherited, and that was a language is simply a naming process. Words name things, and with that there is a one-to-one relationship between word and thing, and that is what he was changing the view, because that is what he thinks. He thought, and rightly so, that that is not the case. So he says that the concept and sound image, it denotes a particular sign. So word is a sign. Sign does not unite thing and name, but sign unites concept and sound image. Sign, therefore, is a psychological unit. Both concept and sound images are psychological units. Now, we generally say an object tree. So what we mean is a general idea of a tree, but not what this particular tree is. Now, the tree could be an apple tree or pear tree, or the banana tree or any other tree. So the concept of a tree is not the actual tree, but the general idea of a tree, and sound image is the mental imprint of the word tree. So language is a system of sign rather than a naming process. Now this is the view he's changing. And sign is composed of sound images and concept, and it's a signifier and signified, and the relationship is arbitrary. Now Saucer created a speech circuit. So this is a speaker, which Saucer, in Saucer's terminology, it is called phonation. This is a listener. In Saucer's terminology, it is audition. So one is speaking, another is listening. Second time, the second one is speaking, and the first one is listening. So he says in his speech circuit, so when two speakers talk, the dialogue starts with the introduction of a mental concept in mind of one of the speaker, which is associated with the sound stream. Now in a speech act, concept sound association is actualized in physical pronunciation of the word, which is transmitted to the listener, whose mind is deciphering the idea corresponding to the physical sound, the sound which he has received. So this interaction Saucer called as his Saucerian speech circuit, where phonation is a speaker, audition is a listener, and there is the reverse process goes on. One, from a concept, he creates the acoustic sound, and from the sound, another create the concept. Now, in 1992 and 1996, social linguistics developed a model, and that model was hinging on culture, language, and how thought was using the cultural input and the language acquisition in acquired input in his thought and producing that thought into in vocal terms. So when we live in a society, in a community, with parents, with siblings, with our neighbors. We go to the schooling, there is the interaction, and each of such interactions help us acquire certain linguistic items, and also it gives us certain concepts, certain propositions, and certain ability to infer, to make sense of certain things. So now the brain has not only memory where it has acquired certain knowledge, but it also has over a period developed an inference mechanism by which it can make sense. So this entire thought, when it comes as a mental activity. It relies on his memory and inference mechanism which has developed, and it sits on the concepts and the propositions, and it uses for the purpose of outwardly communication certain linguistic items, and a sentence or a paragraph gets released. So this is how the word is, this is how the thought gets communicated outside. Now in 1993, Dance and Pinson, these were the two persons who wrote a book, Physics and Biology of the Spoken Language, and they developed a speech chain that with the speaker and listener, and their speech chain had three different levels: the linguistic level, the physiological level, and the acoustic level. And similarly for the listener, it is the acoustic level, physiological level, and the linguistic level. Now from a speaker's point of view, a message as an impulse along motor nerves is sent to the muscles that activate vocal organs. Now physiological level, nerve impulses set vocal muscles into movement that produce pressure change, and sound waves are released and travel in air to the listener. And when listener receives in his ear, that activates listener's hearing, and now impulses that travel through the sensory or the auditory nerve, and that modifies the nerve activity. and the activity recognizes speaker's message. So the speech chain consists of a chain of events that links speaker's brain with listener's brain, and this is what is called speech chain. Now we go to the second segment of this particular discussion, and this segment is how sound reaches brain. Now, before we start into the details of this particular segment, let me give you an anecdotal evidence. Now, in 7,000 unique languages in the world today, there are two words which one can find in at least many of the languages. And those two words are mama and papa. So mama and papa, that generally identifies parents in many languages. Now, babies cry right from day one, and cries are open mouth vowel sound. The easier consonant sound babies make are babbling after a couple of months or maybe a few months of once they are born. And those babbling sounds are mama, mama, ma, pa, 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 ba, ba. You know, these kind of labial or closed lip sound. Now, according to Russian linguist Roman Jacobson, babies gravitate to ma sound or m sound instead of p or pa or ba sound because m sound is the easiest to make because baby is accustomed to the lips action due to the breastfeed. So baby has no idea your name is mama or papa, but parents or a caregiver associate these kind of string of sound with themselves and use these sounds to identify themselves for the baby. So the fundamental property of a spoken language is to establish a relationship between sound string and the meaning of that particular sound string. So mama sound is identified as a mother, papa sound gets identified as a father, and such semantic units of the meaning of such sound units for baby is created by the parents. So subsequently, such sound and meaning relationship is maintained and permeated. Now let's look at it, how sound reaches brain. Now these are the two pictures here, A and B. This is your ear, this is the external auditory canal, and this is the tympanic membrane. These are the three bones which are attached to this tympanic membrane, and these are ossicles. Now the third bone is actually touching the fluid which is sitting in the cochlea. And the lower picture of picture B is a cross section of the cochlea, which shows you that these are the different hair cells, and these are the auditory nerves, and this gets connected to these hair cell and this. And now let's look at the entire play here. So our speech is in sound waves that moves in medium and causes increase and decrease in pressure and enters through our ears. So this is the place. And sound wave reaches external acoustic meters and causes the movement of the tympanic membrane, which is this. And that creates vibration in three small bones known as ossicles. And this transfers energy into cochlea, which is filled with the fluid, and the ossicle vibration makes the fluid ripple. So the fluid here there is a movement in that fluid. So from the top of the hair cells, so these are the hair cells, and the ions or the neurotransmitters, they fall into the inner hair cell, and that cause a release of a chemical that binds auditory nerve cells and create an electrical signal which travels to the brain through the auditory nerve. So this is the auditory nerve, and they are all connected to these hair cells. So the process here is a mechanical energy. The sound, the rippling of the cochlear fluid is a mechanical nature that is getting converted or is transduced into an electrical energy by the auditory receptor cells or the hair cells. Now the different hair cells interpret different frequencies. 200 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Now, here again, these are the hair cells, these are the auditory nerve, and this is going to the olivary complex, and these are the apsilateral and contralateral routes, and this is the auditory or this, the sensory cortex. So auditory nerve synapses to the cochlear nucleus. Auditory information is then transmitted via superior olivary complex, and central auditory system receives and processes information from both side apsilateral and contralateral, and auditory brain circuits encode sound aspects, which are frequencies, attenuation, which is an intensity of a sound, and location in space, which is from left side or right side or front or back or above. So the location in space. So the different frequencies are then mapped onto the dedicated slots in the primary auditory cortex, at which point sound waves are transformed into electric waves. Now, once these sound waves are transformed into electric waves, there is some interesting observations here. So speech, when it is outside the brain, is mechanical in nature. That is, it consists of acoustic waves and sound. However, when the speech comes into the brain, it becomes electric waves, brain waves. So sensory neurons transform sound waves into the package of electrical signals. And there are waves in both the cases, in the sense that outside the brain and inside the brain, the fundamental characteristic of this entire thing is that it is in a wave form. So language is physically made. So electric waves preserve the shape of their corresponding sound waves, which are used for the speech production. Now, this is a new revelation, which is a new finding, and there is a paper below it. You can make a reference to it. These findings shed important light on the relationship between sound waves and the electric waves in the brain. However, all these aspects are the neurophysiological process is related to the language called sound emission decoding. So what are these brain waves? These brain waves are measured in cycles per second. These are neural oscillations. They're rhythmic. They're repetitive patterns of neural activity in the central nervous system. There are many types of waves. However, I've just defined 5 different types here. So the gamma, which is 32 to 100 hertz, is the fastest and subtle waves used for encoding the unit on perception, on learning, on problem solving. The beta wave, which is 13 to 32 hertz, is a small and faster wave for intellectual activity and outwardly focused. Alpha is the slower wave, is associated with the state of relaxation. It's the 8 to 13 hertz. Theta is 4 to 8 hertz. And delta is 0.5 to 4 hertz. But the brain waves are the language of the brain, because only through brain waves, one region of the brain communicates with the other region of the brain. Now, how these brain waves help us make sense of the speech? I'm using this particular paper. Now, when we receive a sound packet or a speech packet, so this is our sound waves, which are phonemes and syllables, and a word and a verb, and those combinations which are come in sound waves. So the corresponding sound wave to electric wave becomes something like this. Now, this is the actual experiment, and based on that, this is represented, and this is the encoding which has happened. So speech consists of hierarchy of components where each is on a different time scale, because there are multiple time scale waves which are part of the speech. The slow delta wave oscillation influenced the magnitude of the faster theta oscillations. Speech cues, which are intonations, occur in a longer time scale and that unfold in more than 100 milliseconds. And end of spectrum is a phoneme, the smallest unit of speech that lasts only tens of milliseconds. Rhythmic brain activity plays an important role in the cognitive process because that grabs the attention, the memory, and affect our decision-making process. So there is a finding out of this particular paper, and that says the hierarchically organized brain oscillations work in concert and track speech components occurring at a different time scale, and that convert a continuous speech stream into a meaningful internal representation. Now, speech encoding using the cortical theta and gamma oscillations. So here is the paper which is have taken this kind of an ARP, which is a speech envelope. So this is the speech envelope or the speech packet which has been received. And this is the theta wave, and this is the gamma wave. The relationship is the theta is syllable and gamma waves are phonemic. They carry phonemic detail and theta carries the syllabic detail. So energy fluctuations in speech at 4 Hz, and it serves as an acoustic guide for signaling syllabic rhythm. So theta rhythm frequency of 3 to 8 bars per second is similar to the frequency of syllables in speech. Frequency of gamma rhythm is similar to the frequency of phoneme, which is the unit of sound. Theta rhythm tracks syllables in spoken language, and gamma rhythm encodes a specific feature of each phoneme. Now, these two rhythms establishes the sequence of phoneme that makes up each syllable. So the syllabic rate coincides with the auditory cortex theta rhythm, which is 3 to 8 Hz, and mnemonic oscillatory process in hippocampus theta oscillation orchestrates gamma neural activity for the subsequent decoding. So this is the process for the linguistic coding of phonemic details, and the entire encoding of the language which comes through sound gets done in our brain. Now, how do we make sense or perceive a impulse which we have received? Now, the perception starts through the senses by the activated sensory neurons. Now, when we have received the sound impulse that gets converted into electric waves and goes to the primary sensory cortex, so there it is activating sensory neurons. So the speech perception, whether it's a conscious or unconscious, whether it's intentional or not intentional, starts in the auditory cortex where the sentient electrical signal units get analyzed and dispatched to several specific brain cortical areas where these are encoded and stored. Now, these are the two different steps that are involved here, that there are at least 2 different scales in that speech packet. And these two have a different resolutions, and the one is, let's say, 20 to 80 millisecond, and other will be 150 to 300 millisecond, and these commensurate with the subsegmental or the syllabic analysis respectively. And we make the perception makes sense by the analysis by synthesis process, and we'll get into more details of it. Now here, the perception of stimuli that gets encoded. There is a memory trace here that gets consolidated. There is a long-term potentiation, which is a synaptic strength following frequency stimulation of the chemical synapse. Then there is a long-term, then there is a storage, is a working memory storage or long-term storage. And then the recognition, inference, and reconstruction, which is the pattern recognition of the impulse which has come, which is being processed. Now, it is generally said that the brain is our pattern recognition machine. So some aspect, yes, it is true, because that's the function which it does. Now, how this memory plays the role in terms of when we receive, how it moves up till long-term storage. So memory has three different aspects: the sensory, the short-term memory, and the long-term memory. So we receive input from the environment, let's say sound we have received, or image we have received, or any such impulse which we have received. Now, they register in some kind of a sensory register, and these are three different types: haptic, iconic, and they interact with the short-term storage, or the working memory process takes over, and that processes it, and that decides to then keep it in the long-term storage or long-term memory, or there is a output response. So input from the environment to the sensory pathway reaches to the respective sensory cortex and gets stored at the sensory memory, and receives and processes these information, which is iconic memory, auditory information; haptic memory, sense of touch information; iconic memory is a visual information. Now, short-term memory, the information processed in a short period of time, and this is a function as a working memory, and that performs certain processing, which we will look at it in the next slide. And long-term memory stores information for the longer period of time, and it is conscious or unconscious, explicit or an implicit memory. Now, the working memory, it has a process that the central executive, which is nothing but your frontal cortex, along with the parietal cortex, that interact with the visuosapral sketchpad, which contains the visual information and the attributes of the visual information, or the features of the visual information. Episodic buffer, the episode or the some kind of information which you have received, which has some kind of a timestamp, which that is the episodic buffer. Phonological buffer. So these three interact, through the central executive. These three are managed in this working memory process. So the episodic buffer stores and integrates information from different sources and chronologically links to long-term memory along with the semantic meaning. So there are two things. One, that it is chronologically linked. Another is that the meaning of it is also associated for that word, that sentence, that paragraph, that phrase. So that's how the semantic meaning we are able to manage. The phonological buffer, which is maintained at the left hemisphere, that holds acoustic information and then the articulatory rehearsals, and it is associated with the Brodmann areas. I believe it is 42 or 45. And this is the Bagley model, which I just talked about. However, please note, scientists or the neuroscientists continue to learn about neurobiology and the architecture of the different types of memory. So this changes. I mean, this is not something which is completely formed up. Now, if you come to the long-term memory, so this is the long-term memory. This shows the complete classification essentially. And these are explicit memory. These are two different types: episodic memory and semantic memory. And on the implicit memory, these are four different types. So in the explicit memory, we have time-related events, which are episodic memory. And semantic memory, it contains the concepts and meaning of the relationship of word and phrases and the paragraph, etc. In the implicit memory, the procedural memory, which is the motor and executive skills, that means once we have learned how to drive a car, or how to drive or how to ride a bicycle, or how to swim, we are able to do without much conscious effort. It just goes on. So such motor and executive skills are procedural memory. The associative memory, a memory which is stored with some kind of association and condition. So those memories are called associative memories. And non-associative memories are those sensitization and habituation that are stored. And priming is an effect when exposed to certain stimuli influences the response to the subsequently presented stimuli. In other words, the primary stimuli is influencing the secondary stimuli. Now, semantic system. Now, this is a paper of 2016 of University of California, Berkeley, and they have used 7 subjects with, I believe, dozens of electrodes, and they were using the functional magnetic resonance imaging, which is the fMRI, and they were taking measure on the blood oxygen level dependent, which is bold. Now, in this experiment, all these 7 subjects, they were hearing a story from a moth radio hour. It's a program, radio program, for more than 2 hours. And at the time they were hearing the story, so let's say this is the picture, this is the story they are hearing. And in this story, if, some of the words which were coming, and let's say about, dance, man, 7, some of these words. And these were the semantic features of that word. And what the board was recognizing that for above, this is the location in the cerebral cortex, that this above as a idea is located. Now, similarly for the dance, similarly for the man, and this similarly for 7. Now, at this time of this experimentation, it was they were also collecting simultaneously data into a computer model. It was a model which was not only recording what the word is, what the location of the cerebral cortex is, what the exact point is, and variety of other aspects. Because in this story, there were 985 unique words they found, and there are 985 such unique locations which has been pointed through the board. So the gist of that, the entire study is that the meaning of language is represented in regions of cerebral cortex, and it is known as semantic system. Now, semantic system presents information about specific semantic domains or group of related concepts, and semantic selectivity across the cortex measured using the voxel-wise modeling of the functional MRI, and data was getting collected. And the words in the story were projected into 985 dimensional word embedding space at 985 locations, and the entire data was getting collected. Now, so the next slide will give you the verification of this entire process which this particular paper has gone through, or this experiment has gone through. Now, in this process, so they, at this time, with the same 7 subjects, they were giving a 10-minute story, but it's a totally new story. However, some of the words were common in that story. And they were using, based on the word uttered to the subject, and the model, computer model, which was pointing to a particular location. And they also saw what is the bold response, of that particular word. So what they find that this is the, let's say, sound packet which is received by the brain. And these were the, let's say, words about, dance, man, 7. And these were the semantic features. This is the computer model which has predicted after learning this the word. And this is the new bold response. That means the fMRI has measured a bold response at a particular point. And mind it, both the computer model and the new bold response pointed to exact location. In other words, at the time of first recording and at the time of verification, both were found to be exactly identical locations. So the study summarizes something like this. So model correlation between predicted and actual bold response was found to be identical. Similarly, the similarity in the semantic topography across different subjects was really surprising. In other words, all these 7 subjects had exactly the same location, same exact cerebral cortex, that particular region or that area, which is lighted for, let's say, a word above, or for a concept dance or man. So that was surprising because they were not expecting that. So the further conclusion comes, so the people process same kind of words in the same brain regions. Words related to same semantic domain tend to occur in similar context. So I have a similar co-occurrence value, and I'll give you a screenshot of the 3D brain atlas, which they created out of this study, and that comes like something like this. So in this semantic map, which they created based on that data, it's a computer model. So they called it as a brain atlas, and this is a interactive 3D viewer, which is showing, let's say, one topographic location of a number concept. Number as an idea, number as a concept, and what is related words for that particular concept. So the words in this location, this is a precentral sulcus, at this location of the cerebral cortex, and this is the number concept, and these are the words out of those 985, they were found to be located at this particular physical location of the cerebral cortex. So that's the finding, and we will have a small illustration of this particular online site, and we can see and we can play with it later on. Now, coming to the next aspect, the speech production. So in our classical speech chain of Danson-Pinson of 1993, we found that there are 3 levels: the linguistic level, physiological level, and acoustic level. Now, functionally, when we think about it, so when we are thinking, we put our thinking into words, then we frame a comprehensible sentence, and then we utter it, we say it, we speak. So these are the 3 different, in generally speak, that's the way we can generally experience. So let's review the play of the brain and the various steps and the play of the vocal apparatus. Now, before we come to that, the study which this particular paper is using, so that study is using that a subject is shown a picture, and once the picture is perceived, and they use a term picture onset is complete, that means the naming process gets triggered from that point. And what are the steps in naming and uttering? So we'll be looking at that. So here, let's define what is the self-generated thought and what is the speech, and then we get into more details of that particular study. So self-generated thought is a mental contents that are not derived from an immediate perceptual input. That means some impulse has not come which has triggered a thinking process. So subjectively, thoughts come from nowhere. They just pop up. Objectively, thoughts emerge from neural process that come from everywhere. So thoughts are millions of neurons firing up together, and this is an electrochemical reaction that manipulates concept and does problem solving and makes decisions. So the brainwave of a subject, which is awake and relaxed, is generally dominated by the alpha waves. And if subject is cerebrating, which is thinking, then the EEG changes to a beta wave. So what is known is the alpha and beta wave frequencies originate from the reticular activating system. So, and thoughts are traced to the limbic system, hippocampus, amygdala, etc. And thoughts are energy particles, and words and actions are also energy particles. And speech is the brain generated thought expressed by means of known words put in a sequence by the mental grammar and executed by the vocal system controlled by the brain. Formation of speech requires processes that organizes and rule by the active functions of the brain. Vocal expression in sound is the phonetic combinations of vowels and consonants, and functionally those three steps: thoughts to words, framing a sentence, and using vocal system to utter it. Now this utterance generator model, which is essentially from thinking to ultimately speaking. So this utterance generator models, the concept in neuroscientists started working from 71, and Fromkin was the first person, which we understand. He's composed an utterance model of 6 stages. In his model, these 6 stages started with the meaning, the concept to meaning, and meaning to syntactic structure, then to intonation, then to words, then function words, the article conjugation, etc., and the phonetic segmentation. So that's how the Fromkin was evolving his 6 stages, and he was experimenting a utterance generator model. The fundamental idea was same, that show a picture to a subject and the subject is supposed to name that picture. And this observation should start after the picture onset is completed. That means picture is perceived, and now the thinking process to name this particular picture and to utter it, that process starts. So the Garrett model in 1975 developed a 3-level utterance: conceptual, sentence, and the motor level. And Dell's model converted this into a 2-step model, which is a semantic to phonological level, but he says there are 3 stages: semantics, words, and phoneme. In 1999, the Levitt model, he refined all other models, including Dell's, and he came up with a 3-step model, or 3-level model rather: conceptual stratum, lemma stratum, and syllabic information. And once the information stored from stratum level, that is sent to the motor cortex, and then it is vocal apparatuses are coordinated to physically produce a speech sound. Now, Levitt with Infree, these 2 scientists, they developed a very comprehensive, competent process of word production and a full process with certain core processes and the play of various parts of the brain and what are the timing of each level. And they also had an advantage of 24 such studies, which was done prior to them. But those studies were done only for a few stages, and they put the entire thing together into one comprehensive sequence. So according to them, the speaking starts by preparing a preverbal conceptual representation, a message. So this is the core process and the conceptual preparation. That means you coming up with a message. Now, select a mental lexicon which is linked to that particular concept which you wish to convey in your message, that contains the grammatical properties of the word, and select the lemma, which is a base word. So that you select, and then its corresponding sound properties, the lexical phonological code and the sequence of phoneme, which gets fed into a phonological encoding process. And output of the phonological encoding, which is an abstract phonological word, that contains the syllabic and prosodic information, how you wish to deliver them, and on phonetic encoding, which translates into an abstract articulated representation, and finally, articulated by coordinating and executing the activation of the speech musculature, all the muscles and various parts of the musculature gets used for the purpose of speaking. So what they came up with is a final production process, in which is the conceptual preparation, lexical selection, phonological encoding, phonetic encoding, and articulation. And these are the core processes, and what is dependent and what is the output of this particular core process. That means conceptual preparation to lexical concept, to lexical selection, to lemma, to phonological code retrieval, to phonetic encoding, to gestureless code, to spoken word. So the entire sequence and the process, and ultimately they also demonstrated the play of these process steps in the respective area in the brain. Now, the color of these, let's say lemma retrieval and lemma selection, is a yellow color. So this is the area of the brain, and this 190 is 190 millisecond, which it is taking to do this particular process. And this is the phonological code retrieval process, which is happening here, syllabification process, which is happening here, articulation process, which is happening here. Now, they also added a self-monitoring process at two levels. One, immediately after phonological word creation level, and second, once the word is articulated. Now, there is the feedback loop in these two stages, by which you can, or one can, recalibrate the emphasis or variety of other parameters, or this the volume, or this the amp and the other intonation aspect of it. So those recalibration are done through a self-monitoring process. So they incorporated this process also, and this is the paper one can refer for the details of this particular description of the paper. Now, the various parts of the brain which are in play for the particular activity, and what is the time scale or the time it takes. So this is the place where the lexical selection from the concept is happening. So this is your middle and inferior temporal gyri, which takes something like 150 to 225 milliseconds. Now, phonological code retrieval happens in the middle temporal gyrus and the parieto-occipital gyrus, 200 to 400 milliseconds. The superior temporal gyri or gyrus is for self-monitoring process. Syllabification is the middle and inferior frontal gyri here, and the phonetic encoding and articulation is happening in the pre and post-central gyri, which is here. So these are the observations of the timing, the area of the brain, and what the activity which is happening in that particular part of the brain. Now, once the syllabification is completed, the utterance is handed over to the sensory cortex, and this is the post-central gyrus of the schematic. And the production of speech sound requires precisely coordinated multiple articulators over a rapid time scale. So it has to be subsequently done. And voice production is controlled by the neural system that controls vocalization, motivation, and the various parts get involved. The latest study on this that assigns a dominant articulator role is lips, jaw, tongue, and larynx. And there are certain timings and certain details which you can find in this particular paper. So the motor cortical area has three different subsystems, 1, 2, 3. And the subsystem 1 is essentially a sensory motor phonatory nuclei in the brainstem and spinal cord. to control the laryngeal and articulatory and respiratory muscles. 2, that controls the vocalizations and motivation. And subsystem 3 is the laryngeal and orofacial motor cortex that controls the speech production. Now, there are various articulators in our speech apparatus, and these articulators are defined as a generator, vibrator, resonator, and modulators. And so speech begins with the wind by the contraction of the lungs that initiates airflow and provide air, which acts as the generator. And when we speak, air is expelled from the lungs, air moves up through trachea to larynx and passes over vocal cords, and this is called vibrator. The components that vibrate are vocal cords and larynx and many resonant chambers. Pharynx, mouth, nasal cavities, and the larynx produces the vibrations without which we have no voice. The resonators are the nasal cavities, pharynx, mouth, and larynx, and that alters the sound by amplifying certain frequencies and while attenuating others. So the transformation of sound from larynx then complete by the position of the soft palate, tongue, teeth, lips, and other parts of the mouth, and these acts as the modulator. The size of the cavity change and the tongue changes shape. Tongue and lips obstruct airflow. Lips alter their shape. So there are many aspects which plays a role in our one simple word production from our mouth. Now these three, the generator is primarily giving you air, the vibrator, resonator, and modulator, they are controlling the frequencies, the wavelengths. So let's understand how these three different combinations of the frequencies and the wavelength comes out, but we are still able to make sense. So for this purpose, I'm using an example of a guitar, a frequency decomposition of sound, just to give you an example. Now guitar has, let's say, so many strings, and if you pluck one string, if one particular sound may come with maybe a low-pitched sound, other a high-pitched sound, and other maybe much higher sound. But if you pluck all these three together, these three chords together at the same time, the resulting sound waves are the sum of all three individual sound waves. So speech production is similar. When someone speaks, one sound is heard by the listener, and we will have an example also in the elimination section. However, the speech sound is different because we use the word, the speech is our signature. The reason for that is that each person's speech is unique. So humans have different voice boxes with different mechanical properties to produce different speech. Now, speech sounds are timed sequence of movements from lower to upper respiratory tract to produce phonemes. Sound is composed of several frequencies that vary over time. A man who speaks with low pitch sound produces sound waves composed of lower frequencies. Women with high pitched voices produces higher frequencies. So human speech sounds are produced through a coordinated movement of structures along the vocal tract. So this is the sound wave, this is the spectrogram, these are the acoustic frequencies, and this is the the area where the entire speech process begins and completes. Now, this is the final model, and Dr. Villakosaras model. This is the paper which we have used. Now, this is a neurological model of the production of speech. Now, if one looks at, this is the prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking center, occipital cortex, which is a visual information center, and superior medulla and the inferior temporal cortex, which is lexical, semantic, and phonological information. This is the sensory cortex, or the parietal and sensory and association cortex. They all interact with the prefrontal cortex, and which in turn interact with the Broca area, which is our articulatory control center, which interact with the motor cortex, and they're all linked to the vocal cords, tongue and soft palate, facial muscles, masticulatory muscles, and muscles for the extremities for the purpose of prosody, your hand movement or your face movement or your other expressions. And this provides you the air without which we can't speak, the lung and the abdominal muscle, dorsal muscles, and various other muscles, which gives us the capacity to breathe and to exhale. So this is the model by which we are able to not only process but make sense and produce a sound. Now I'll give you two illustrations based on these two different sites, which will give you some more detailed understanding of that 3D brain atlas and that these different sound vibrations which we speak and how do we make sense of it. So I'll go to a particular website where we'll be able to look at. I'm hoping you are able to see this. Are you able to see this semantic map? Can anybody confirm? Hello?
Yes, we can see it. Yeah.
We can see it. We can see
Thank you. Thank you. So this is the, yep, thank you very much. So this is the semantic map, and I've gone to this particular website, and this is, you can play with it. I'm just simply using a next button. Now using that next button, it is showing me a particular location of the cerebral cortex. And this is giving you a concept of shape and spatial information. And these are the words which are located in this particular area. Now, if I click next again, so it gives me another social words and some dramatic words. This is the location. And these are the words which are stacked in this part of the cerebral cortex. Now, this is the concept which I used in my screenshot in the slide in the presentation. And this is the number concept. And these are the numbers which are located in this, or these are the words which are located at this particular area. Now, you can play with it without going through this next button, and it lists as per whatever they have collected in their model. And it can be phased in or phased out depending on how you wish to do it. So this is one demonstration just to give you that there is a concept in our brain, and that concept related words are associated in that part of the brain, and that's the purpose of this particular demonstration. Now let me give you another example, and that is so I'll be playing a video and just bear with me. I'm sure you'll be able to hear.
Try to make sense of it. The brain is basically a pattern recognition machine. It's desperate to find patterns. It doesn't like just random sounds or sort of random. It tries to find patterns, and sometimes they're illusory.
Oh. I'm so sorry, there is some problem.
Sometimes it sort of grasps at something that isn't there. So I'm going to play you a sound. It's just sort of like you can hear it for yourself. Could you play me number one, please? Anybody want to say what you heard?
Bird song?
Bird, okay. Could you play me number two, please? Another bird, maybe? Whistling?
Whistling.
Radio, okay. Number three?
R2D2, yeah.
Okay, now if we combine those three sounds, could you play me the 1, 2, 3 example, please?
Where were you a year ago?
Hey, what did you hear?
That sounded like.
Can you play it again?
Where were you a year ago? Voice.
Play it one more time.
Where were you a year ago? Where were you a year ago?
Okay, one final time. Okay, where were you a year ago? Okay, now, so each of those little bird kinds of phrases, we combined 3 of them and we got speech. We got familiar English language speech. And that's because the way this was synthesized is we started with speech, and I'll play you the original from which this was synthesized. Could you play me the natural speech, please?
Where were you a year ago?
So somebody actually said that into a microphone. Okay, we analyzed on a computer what's called a spectrogram and traced the energy peaks over time, the 3 most prominent energy peaks over time, which are called formants, or resonances on a musical instrument. They're where most of the energy is.
So what we have seen is an example which has been that how the speech sound, when it is synthesized and isolated into 3 different sound waves, and then you combine, then the speech sound is again understood and can be retained. However, when it is in a 3 different isolated form, we cannot make sense of it. So that's the overall purpose of that particular illumination. Now, these were the references I've used in this presentations, and thank you for your attention.
Excellent, Premji. Excellent.
Can you all
Very good, Nagarji. Very, very good.
Can you all unmute?
आप तो प्रकांड पंडित हो गए.
Can you take the unmute? All people unmute. Unmute and clap together. Can we? Unmute. No. Just call unmute. Everybody unmute. Everybody
आप तो वाकई
unmute.
प्रकांड पंडित हो गए आप.
Nice presentation.
Everybody unmute.
बहुत बढ़िया प्रेम नगर जी.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay, do one more time.
बहुत भारी research की.
One more time together.
Very
Together.
detailed, sir.
Together.
It was very nice.
Together. All right. So you heard, I think before we continue, I have to thank a couple of people and then we take questions. Chandu Shah hosted us and he has been a supporter, part of our IDC. And so we thank him for organizing, registering, and letting you people know. And then Manish Srivastava, who is our recorder. So I will also request that all of you who like this may support us, and then we can continue to produce the videotapes and so on and distribute. I have to make a couple of more announcements. One is that what you heard from Prem is the clinical part of it that we want to use. We should emphasize that the Indian contribution to the speech is the discovery of syllables. Syllable as a neurological unit. Syllable is conditioned by your anatomy, your biology, your brain functions, and people long time ago, before Panini, can you all? So they discover that there are 64 of these syllables. Now 64 syllables, whether they contain all information of the universe. That is, whatever we can receive by senses, the different procedures Prem mentioned, or also what we can imagine. So all that can be contained as neurological units so that we can express. So that's the concept of a syllable. Now the syllable theory has not come to the Western literature yet, because Western literature has been stuck with the phonetics, the phonemes. So what happens is the phonemes are a combination of the syllables, half syllable, full syllable, the way we express syllables. So that has to be our next approach, to see what the syllables are, how they form. So the process is, as we see, as you hear, you're processing syllables, because brain can only process syllables. So that's the neurological unit. Now, why it's the neurological unit, we don't know yet. But that's the Indian theory, that you have the capacity to process, capacity to speak, all imagination, all reactions, all processes, all thoughts. We are taking this to a conference in Australia next January, 22 January. So if you want to support us, please write. Prem, so we'll did one paper which Prem presented today, the consonants. Then we're going to vowels. So syllables, we'll have a talk in syllables in June. I invite you all to join there, and we'll continue. Also, I have to announce that I will give a talk on next month, no, February 20th, on a different topic. It will be the IDC public lecture called the 10 Thought Leaders from India. And I'll announce that and so on. So anyway, so now you have questions for Mr. Nagar. Can you have one more time of applause for Prem Nagar? Beautiful survey of the literature, comprehensive survey, brilliantly done. And
App system.
all right. So so let me also recognize a couple of people here, like there is a Sheshadri Ramaswamy, Dr. Sheshadri Ramaswamy from MIT. He joins us occasionally, has been a supporter. He gives us literature. He is here. And Dr. Dev Patnaik, he joins occasionally. Lately he has come in. So he's thinking about the human emotions. So as they progress, we will include them in our research. Then also we have Dr. Jaydev Dasgupta, who has joined, and he will think about the auditory part of it, in the sense, if we can process syllables biologically. Why biologically? Because your body has limitations. You have only so many organs, and they have on time scales. So hence they can process certain things. So then the question is, as this alpha, beta, gamma, theta, these waves form, do they eventually congregate into different syllables, so which becomes the neurological units of cognition. So, and then if that's so the hearing also would happen through those syllables. But we have not really gone into that part of it, because this is extremely native, indigenous. So we have to find the resource tools and to deal with it. I see two other names here who might not seen before. One, Mr. Bhaskar. Will you recognize yourself? Bhaskar, anyone you call Bhaskar here? And another name I saw, Amar. Maybe they're not.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi.
Okay. All right. What's your interest, and how do you relate to what you heard or what you are trying to hear?
Mr. Nagar is my Mamaji, actually.
Okay. All right. Very good.
And but this is an area that I've always found pretty interesting.
Okay.
I did research at a research center where they used electrodes where they developed the electrodes to study these electrical signals that Mr. Nagar showed. And so, like, what has come out of that is actually quite interesting. I think the most interesting that I found was the semantic map. I looked at that. I'm just amazed by that. My gosh, incredible. What this like three-dimensional.
Are you in the US or in India?
I'm in the US, in Michigan.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Do join us.
Yeah.
Do join us. We need new probes, because the cognition to partition of cognition happens such a time scale, we don't know how to even capture it. So, and there's another gentleman called Amar. Is Amar here? No Amar?
I'm Amar, actually.
You're Amar. Okay, all right.
Oh, there's another Amar.
Okay, all right. Okay, now open for questions. I just want to, because people said that you should know who they're joining and what they're so on, just for our own sake, because we're all volunteers. Knowledgeable people come in, because the difficulty is not many people understand this whole neurological unit. People think that we hear and so is language. People don't understand that you express. The bird also expresses, the tree expresses, the sun expresses. So the language is not what you hear. Language is what is expressed. And that's where the India comes in. The expression is done by syllables, which are produced in the body. And the question is whether those syllables are cosmic, are they eternal? That's because where the man has the potential to express everything that is there. So that's the dichotomy. Once you say no, man is limited, it doesn't work. All right, questions. Anybody has questions?
Sir, can I have a question?
Yeah.
I think to an extent I might know the answer for the question I'm asking.
Okay.
I don't know if the Western literature distinguishes the different languages, especially the mother tongue versus some other language in this context of the literature survey that we just discussed. Because I speak Tamil as my mother tongue, but I also speak Hindi, Kannada because I'm in Bangalore, Sanskrit research, so English. So is there a distinction in terms of this connection between the language, cognition, sound?
Good question.
I don't know if there is a distinction.
Prem, you want to comment on it?
Joji, I think why don't you comment, because we wrote in that paper.
Well, the answer is the West thinks the languages are different, and hence the phonemes are different. So that's a kind of a theological view that has gone in from the Bible. That is, the languages of the tribes, and different people speak differently, and they are frozen to it. They're cultural. I think Prem also mentioned that in his history, that the word has a cultural connotation. So what we saw in our final picture that you might have seen, that cultural connotation happens much later. So that's the origin of it. In the origin, there is no culture. We are human beings. And then, however, from the neurological unit, cognitive neurological unit, when it gradually processes further, acoustic unit also is not cultural. But then it transforms into what we communicate. And in Sanskrit, they call it Vaikhari. That is what goes out. And then the audience, the listener might come in the picture, and we kind of say, okay. But what the literature will say, even if we put intonation to it, even if you put some color to it, but you are still conditioned by speaking syllables. You can't escape it because your body can only express syllables. So whichever way you do, you dissect them, you will find the syllables. So that's the idea. And that study has not been done in a larger scale, but it seems to be physically and cosmologically true. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir. So neurologically, it all boils down to the syllable.
That's what the Indian theorists will say, and that's what physically, I will say that has to be. You and I are no different.
See, we actually have research on that says when an infant is born, he or she is citizen of the world. It's only in the first 7 months the cultural bias is introduced by the mother tongue. So that is confirmed research.
Right. Okay, other questions? Yeah.
May I ask?
Oh,
Can I
okay.
ask a question?
Yeah, please do.
Let me congratulate Prem for consolidating a massive amount of information in 1.5 hours. Now I have a couple of questions, but I'll ask this question that in one of your slides presents where 7 subjects, where fMRI was done on 7 subjects when they are listening to a story, and that's how they came to the mapping of words on different parts of cortex, cerebral cortex. The question is that often a word has multiple meanings and quite varied meanings. Does that mean that all those meanings are mapped at the same place, and brain always, depending on the context, it picks up one meaning, or are there different maps related to different meanings?
So let me take that, Jadev, the question.
I think you read the paper, yeah.
Yeah, no, give me 1 second, Bijoyji. So, Jadev, I think the illustration which I have and that paper which that mentions, the University of California paper I'm talking about here, that they are saying that there are specific conceptual areas in our brain. Now that conceptual area has an association of those words. Now a word can be also in the different conceptual area as well. In other words, an apple would be in a fruit concept, right? But apple also would be in a concept of, let's say, computer or telephony, or of phones in general. So the same word probably is sitting at 2 different places.
I see.
So it's a conceptual location, and that particular area of the brain is associated with that particular concept.
But this dichotomy goes away once you have the neurological unit. So it's a different. Okay, Kothari sir.
So no, this is highly complex, and I am a perfect outsider to this. But I just venture to just ask you that we are saying that word is a secondary to thoughts. So we are giving a preeminence to thought. First there is a thought, and then there is a word.
That's what we believe. I think that's what you heard today.
So what is the
model we are trying to build?
So what is the substratum of thought? The substratum of word is thought, but what is the substratum of thought?
We don't know.
So
that you have to experiment yourself to see where do you think. What we are doing, the model that we are trying to build is, suppose you have a thought. You don't say where the thought came from.
Yes.
Suppose you have a thought. So how does that thought move itself in the brain and try to crystallize? The thought is nebulous. So thought takes a form now, and that form then visualized. So this particular process of visualization of the thought, and then from that visualization, you try to say, do I express or don't I express? So there comes intentionality. And when you want to express, some acoustics kick in. That is because that's all you can express. You can do some gestures, so the facial expressions, some movement you can do, physiological, but then it comes the acoustics. So this proto-cognitive syllables, which are there in the thought, so they become acoustic syllables. But how that process takes place, we don't know yet. We are trying to dig, not that we can complete it, but that's the process we are trying to go through.
So the secondary details are of course important, but they are secondary details. No, would you like to comment on the phrase that in the beginning there was word, the word was with God, and the word was God?
We don't get into those.
We don't want to get into that?
We don't get into those.
Okay.
We don't get into those. Yeah.
Actually, there is some literature in neuroscience that claims that one gets around 800 thoughts every minute.
Yes.
It's independent of your, will or intentionality. So it's only intentionality then puts it to its captures it.
Grabs it, yeah.
But you could be right. I think the point is where the thought comes from, this para as a Sanskrit word, which Vedas talk about. So we do not quantify what para is, or we are kind of so low now,
Yes.
So we cannot, the question is maybe several generations later, they might think about, if we proceed in this line, at the present time, the world doesn't talk about these lines. World says learn a language, and that as though that's the standard language. He talks good Tamil. So talks good Tamil has no meaning. There's no good Tamil. He talks his language. He talks as he can do. But that doesn't mean that's different than somebody talks just Tamil. See, that's the difference, the human expression.
Yeah.
The human expression is biological, which is inside of your brain. And that brain, same as you, same as me. The question is, my physiology could be different. I may not have a tongue. I may not have a proper voice organs. It may sound different. Geographically.
In that sense, deaf and dumb people also have a language, no?
So that is no Queen's English or John's English or Delhi Hindi.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Any other question?
Mr. Ji, give me 1 second. Yeah.
Please do.
Yeah, Dr. Kothari, it's something like this. When we think, the thinking is not in terms of words. Because one may know, let's say, 5 different languages, and one may not know any or may know languages, but he cannot express because of his some limitations, or he's using only certain expression. So transforming what your thought is into a Gujarati language, because your context around is Gujarati at the time, or English, or Bengali, or any other, then you choose that language to convey what you are thinking. Or if you do not, you can't speak, so you will have an expression by hand gesture or by face or by eyes to express what you are trying to convey. So thought, to our understanding so far, I think is an independent of any word or any language.
Sure, certainly.
We'll come to that. We'll come to that in the follow us in 2021. We will try to see as much as we can. Other questions? We're past 11:30 now. Maybe another 15 minutes. Anyone has any question?
I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, Premji, very interesting talk. I really enjoyed it, and I think it's a lot of information there. But I will ask you a very simple question. You mentioned that what we hear is transformed into electrical signal, and that, which is very interesting thing that I found, is that has connection to brain waves. My question is, how does the brain memorizes or stores the different sounds or different speech that we hear and retrieve?
Okay, Devaji, let me give you one.
Bella can probably do a better job on that. Bella, would you respond to it? Unmute yourself.
It's very interesting.
No, it's like how the memory functions. Much of it not known, but yes. Bella, unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Bella is not there, I guess.
No, he is there, but
he's
speaking, but not unmute. Unmute, or let me see if I can unmute him.
He's not on me. Yeah.
I don't see him.
Yeah, I think he's not there.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you an answer. I mean to that. So
he's still speaking, but not unmuted.
Yeah, sure. There is a recent paper from MIT, and that is talking something like this. But the sound is received inside, and there is a transduction happening. I mean, there's conversion happening. That conversion into the electric waves maintains the shape of the sound which it has received. Now, mark the word. Now, second, let's understand a second aspect of it. Now, when we speak, we are able to speak initially probably the way we heard it, And over a period, once we have mastered what we heard, and on that word we have now command, now we can use the intonation and various other aspect of it. And then we modify our speech the way we speak. However, the fundamental association which that paper reveals, I may not have the details of how it does, but what it says is that it maintains the electric form or the waves maintain some level of, let's say, a key or a decode to convert that string, that encoding into sound when it has to convert it into sound.
I see.
So that's the relationship that paper talks about.
I see. Okay, thank you.
There is a reference in the
Bella is
slide.
unmuted now. Bella, you can speak.
So there were several theories about how the memory, how the words and events and emotions stored in the brain. There was some synaptic memories, the synaptic theories that many synapses are generating, and there was some protein synthesis, new protein synthesized for the memory. And actually there was a contradiction. So if we start from the birth and the adulthood, so how big would be the brain if always some new protein would be synthesized? So that could be the brain wouldn't fit in our skull, and similarly the synapses. So, and there was actually kind of approximate knowledge where the memory is located. There was some, and we somehow know that the hippocampus play a role in the memory. But that was about the 1970s when Eccles projected that maybe the long-term memory stored in the first layer of the cortex, because there are so many fibers, synapses are. So it actually it wasn't proved yet. So I would say how the memory is stored in the brain at this time, we don't know.
Okay, all right, move on.
So just one.
No, wait.
Okay,
so let me see if
let other people speak.
Anybody else has a question. Anybody else? The last two questions. We have to close. Yeah.
Well, this is Vishal. Can I ask a question, please?
Please do.
Mama Namaskar. Thank you so much for an informative talk. My question is more provoked from the profound talk that you gave. If we think of linguistics and we think of linguistic forward-looking, the world is looking at computational linguistics, primarily from the perspective of the machine learning and AI, which we all experience through Alexa AI or Google Home and all that stuff. And I know there are linguistic teams that are working for Google and Alexa. And since we have identified that where the thought is coming from, the black box man, as Professor Mishra said in the beginning, now we are saying, is the process of just a reply to the thought has been divided by computational linguistics? Because there is no inception of thought. It's more of a response from a machine learning algo that's replying. How do you see as a linguist of where that growth is happening and how the study that we have done from 1900 to now to the application of that in computational linguistics and where we are going with this? Because clearly there is no thought, there is no emotion, at least in the AI engine at this point. It's more of response. It's learning from the behavior pattern. I also think that many of these things are experiential, like apple is an apple because you have the experience of an apple. But machine doesn't have that. Is it learning from human behavior? Kind of forward-looking perspective. Thank you.
Okay.
Prem,
So, give me 1 second.
Please do.
So, Alexa or Siri or such mechanism which they claim that is an AI-based mechanism. What essentially it means is that it's a repository of information which they carry, and they have an inference mechanism by which they are able to analyze quickly and come up with some kind of a answer. So that's the current. These computational linguistic or computational mechanisms which are currently in play or in place, they are all fundamentally developing based on certain specific knowledge and a retrieval mechanism. That's their the aspect is to provide some level of a digital assistance to the people who have a particular question or particular need. Like we say, Alexa, play this particular song, then Alexa really goes into a database, triggers a certain action.
Amazon Music Unlimited on this Echo Dot. It's free for 30 days and then you'll be off.
Okay, so it is basically kicking certain triggering certain operations.
Amazon Music Unlimited on this Echo Dot. It's free for 30 days and then you'll be automatically charged.
Yeah.
Well, it clearly works.
Yeah, I know. So the point which I'm trying to make is that these are mechanical databases with a very sophisticated acquisition of knowledge and a very the inference mechanism which is developed over it is very, very intricate to come up with some kind of a first of all decipher what you are saying, then second of all come up with a the execution plan that will execute, find out what this particular song is or whatever that is, and bring that song to play. So these are all mechanical nature, and human brain is much different than simple mechanics. Yes, loosely we say that it's a it's a matching machine or the pattern matching machine, but that's a very only very tiny part of the brain which we are describing or which we are discussing.
See, the question is, I think you are extremely right. The computational linguistics is a communication medium, reductionism. So that is where this contribution of engineering is coming, that let us reduce the man. So whether that will eventually happen, which means our vocabulary will be reduced, we'll be operating on a limited set of words, limited set of expressions. So whether that is the future of humanity, I do not know. But it looks like the man is much larger than a machine. So hence, we have to somehow see the machine has no emotion, because you are a musician, you are the musician, right, Vishal? So the musician has the emotion. So every play you do is different than the previous play. Every note you do is different than the previous note. You're the same person, the same instrument, but the note is different. So now why the note is different? The context is different. The environment is different. The process is different. The audience is different. So this is the context in which we understand. And so we have to place it from the larger cosmological viewpoint that there is a humanity in it. And whether that will be decimated, I do not know. But from the Indian point of view, that decimation is not right. So that's the reason for a long time, the Indian music was not written. It is not written even now, because that is reduction. You remove the nuances of it by reduction. what I'm speaking. If I write, you read differently. So that is the human part of it. The gestures, the expressions, the intonations, the emotion, the intensity, the conviction. So those will come. So it's not flattened. So we shall see. I think we're getting 11:45. Anybody has any burning question? Otherwise we close. Smitaban, any burning question you have?
No, I am just so thankful that I decided to join in. A lot of wonderful information, lot to absorb, and hopefully we can have a way of reviewing all this information. A layperson like me, this is just mind-boggling. And thank you so much.
It is dense.
Everyone.
Basanji, you want to make a comment?
Oh, I just want to thank both of you for presenting this. There is no question at all.
Okay, all right. Bala, you have a comment?
Yeah, I want to congratulate Prem for a fantastic talk. It was very wonderful. I had one question with reference to what Dr. Sriram mentioned earlier, and that is, all the talk that I've heard it's one language specific. That's what I understand. But anyway, if you are a multilingual, and if you're in a crowd with different people speaking, and one person talks in Hindi, the next person talks in Tamil, the third person talks in English, how does the brain distinguish which language is being spoken and understand that? So it's not just one dictionary which has all this information, but it has to have multiple dictionaries depending upon the linguistic capability of the individual.
I think Dr. Bela-Kosaras may answer this, but I'll just give you one little thing, very quick answer. And there's a brain is a pattern recognition machine, right? So a brain is a pattern recognition machine. So a Hindi or whatever sound patterns which you're receiving, it is ultimately getting converted, of course, into the electrical signals. And those electrical signals in turn is getting mapped to something which is stored in our the cerebral cortex, and that is what it is able to find, whether it is Hindi or Urdu or Tamil or Bengali or any other language, right? So that's my short answer. But yeah, Dr. Kosaras.
Ram has a comment. Let Ram comment. Ram, yeah.
I just have a quick comment actually answering
please do.
Bala and Shivram. What I was going to say is language is a mapping between a signifier and the signified. We can think of it as a one-to-one mapping, or you can also think of it as a many-to-many mapping. Like the word apple can mean a lot of different things, right? And for one object, you can have multiple words associated with it. And then the signifier itself can be grouped into different sections, and each one is like a language. So now you have a many-to-many mapping, and within the many you have subgroups, and each language becomes a group. And when you hear a syllable and a word, you just pick up and then you associate it with the object. You don't really need to know what language you're speaking. My kids always laugh at us saying that when my wife and I speak, not even one sentence is either purely in English or in Tamil. It's always mixed up. Even grammar is mixed up. But still we are able to communicate, right? So you don't get too hung up on the concept of language as very rigid and everything is coherent. Think of it as many-to-many mapping with subgroups on both the signifier side and the signified side. Then it's very easy.
Great, excellent. So now, since there are many people from Nagar's family here, may I request his sister, Nisha ji, are you there? To offer a vote of thanks to all people on behalf of Nagar and Nagar family, since many of you are present. Unmute yourself. Yeah.
First of all, I would like to say that I really enjoyed the detailed information about language and the brain. But I had a question which I didn't ask, but if you want, I can ask that question if you have time. That he's an IT guy, how did he get into this subject?
That's a personal question. You can take her
Okay.
personally, private calls.
Okay, so I would
No,
like to
I think he had interest. Let me talk on our behalf. He had interest in biology. He has always interest in biology. And then when we try to include an intense discussion, he just very rapidly, exponentially moved forward. So it's not I think it happened to many people, but he's exceptional. So thank him, or thank you for having a brother like him.
Of course, yeah, I'm really proud
But would
of
you
him.
want to propose a vote of thanks? Can you?
Sure, yes. I would like to thank the society who is providing all these lectures, and especially you, because you are the prime member of this society, and all the people who have joined today. And thank you so much. And I look forward to other talks, and I would like to join those too. Thank you.
Okay. Can you unmute yourself and let us thank, here is Manish and Chandu and all people who helped us doing it. And then we will meet you again if you want to join on my lecture, February 20, the 10 thought leaders from India. Let's close. Thank you again.